Pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations. Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue. It's frustrating to be in a conflict that never seems to get resolved. Some conflicts may even seem to be unresolvable. What kind of choices do you have when you reach an impasse in a personal or in a business conflict? The Dispute Resolution Center of Austin offers an alternative to ongoing conflict or costly litigation. It's a place where controversy can achieve resolution. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church.
And I'm Ruth Landsberg of Congregation Agudath Achim, and we are your hosts for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Today we will explore the mediation process at the Dispute Resolution Center, where neutral mediation is used to help people realize their own resolution to conflict. We're pleased to have with us today Andre Hampton, immediate past president of the Dispute Resolution Center, and Lisa Wager, Dispute Resolution Center mediation case manager. We welcome you both to the show. Andre, tell me, why was such a center founded? What was the need for such a place?
Well, originally the need arose because of crowded court dockets. And this was becoming quite expensive and a big waste of time for the courts and the government in general. And that was the inside view. But on the other hand, there were people that had been around who have always believed that there had to be an alternative to pursuing litigation in the courts. And there was also a group of people that understood that there's conflict out in the community that really is not appropriate for the courts. So the DRC basically exists right now to provide peaceful, prompt, and cost-efficient alternative dispute resolution, and also to educate the community that there are alternatives to the court system.
I see. And Lisa, you're a case manager. What sort of cases do you receive in general?
Well, the cases usually come under three different categories. One is business disputes, and we have everything here from merchants and people who buy customers. You have partners in business together. You have employee-employer types of things. You have co-workers, peers, who have arguments amongst themselves where they can be settled, or at least talk about them at the Dispute Resolution Center. Then we have neighborhood disputes, and these range anywhere from the dog who barks next door to the people who live next door who play loud music, or just some kind of conflict about neighborhood types of issues. The last and probably the most prevalent one are family relationships, or any type of relationship. With post-divorce mediations, or probably half of our mediations are those dealing with post-divorce issues, such as child support, visitation. And then we also have a program for parents and adolescents to come in, and this program was developed to help with such issues as truancy, runaways, keeping the kids in school. But you can use it to determine curfews or to establish better communications between the parent and the adolescent, or however they need, however they need to use it for their situation.
Now, what would be the difference, Lisa, between that service and counseling? Why would people go there instead of going to psychotherapist or, someone that could help them in that way?
The disputes at the Dispute Resolution Center are those that come up, and it's not like a long-term problem that people would really be better served if they were to go to a psychologist or a professional who could work with them and be there for them as a support system on an ongoing basis. The types of things that we have at the Dispute Resolution Centers are things that came up relatively quickly, have not been long-standing problems, and they may decide in the mediation to seek out more professional help for an ongoing basis. It may be the beginning to make the decision to do that. So they can certainly talk about those kinds of things, but we're set up to handle 1, maybe 2 mediations with the clients, and that's a 2 or 3 hour session.
And who are your mediators, and what is their background, and what qualifies them to step into someone else's problem there?
That's a good question. The mediators are all volunteers, and they're from all different backgrounds. We have attorneys, we have school teachers, counselors, homemakers, so that we're not really looking for specifically the background, although some cases a business background might be helpful in some mediations when it comes to the end of the mediation and you're reality testing, how is this agreement going to hold up. What we look for mediators is people who have good communication skills, who are able to remain neutral, which is a very difficult thing to do. Most people want to give advice, and that's one thing in the mediation. We remain neutral throughout the mediation. We don't give advice. We don't make any decisions for the people. It's based on their own decisions.
So you remain neutral in more than one way. In other words, you're not taking sides between 2 parties, and you're not offering advice or say this is the answer to your problem sort of thing.
That's exactly right.
And I understand, Andre, that you're an attorney.
Yes.
But that you don't have to be an attorney to work with the DRC.
No, basically, you really don't have to be an attorney to work at the DRC because that profession doesn't particularly bring anything extra to the skills. As Lisa said, you need to be able to communicate and you need to know how to remain neutral in that environment. And if anything, the basic career of an attorney primarily is to be an advocate. And we send attorneys through the training like we do anyone else, and it takes a little while to readjust, to know that, well, really, you're not here to be an advocate for one or the other of the parties. You're here to be a facilitator of communication between the parties. So, as a result, we have attorneys who are mediators, and the ones that we have are good mediators, but percentage-wise, it's probably about 25%, and we have people from all other walks of life.
Well, I think that one of the things that I sense from what you both said, and just referring a little bit, Ruth, to what you were bringing out earlier, and that is that there is a process that's involved here that seems to me to be the heart of what you're doing. That you mentioned staying neutral, and any other ground rules or guidelines that you use.
What is the process really, from beginning to end? If you had a problem, how would you come to the center?
How would you come from the day that you call into the center? That's when you talk to myself or to one of my coworkers who are taking the incoming calls. And we are very thorough with them, determining whether or not this is a situation that's appropriate for mediation. There are some situations that aren't, where there's ongoing abuse, where one of the people feel like they're in danger. We will not mediate those cases. Physical abuse. We check that out thoroughly. There's some pre-divorce cases that we won't mediate when they're trying to decide on large settlements of money or houses or that sort of thing. And we let them know what the process involves, which basically is that they have a place to come and sit down with the other party, say, this is how I see the situation to be, this is how I'd like to have what I'd like to have happen as a result of the mediation. And the mediators are there to facilitate communication between the two of them. And they do that by listening for areas of agreement, for areas of disagreement. They help them to clarify what the issues are. They help them to generate options one by one for each of the issues. They take the issues one by one, and then they can start to go through the different options and see which ones they agree on, have a bargain and negotiation period. And if they have agreements and if they want the mediators to, which doesn't always happen, sometimes the purpose of the mediation is not to get an agreement, but maybe to further communication between the two, or to establish a guideline of communication or a model of communication. But if they do have an agreement, the mediators can write up an agreement form and give it to them, and they can take that out with them.
Is there sometimes a delay between when you call and when you actually get in for mediation, or can you get in generally pretty quickly?
You can get in generally within a week to 10 days.
And is there a fee?
Yes, there's a $10 fee for each participant, and that can be waived, or we can work out payments with people who have trouble meeting that.
Now, it's $10 per time that folks meet with you, and
Each time.
and how often will people come back? I mean,
We'll
months
schedule...
and months?
Well, normally 2 or 3 mediations are the maximum. We don't like to do more than
So
that.
short.
Yes, you start to develop some interdependence on the mediators and those kinds of things, transference, counter-transference things.
So you don't want to have people spend the rest of their life with you, Andre, is that right? And on these disputes?
Well, that's true, and to do that, if you would see that people are becoming dependent on the mediators, it's kind of in opposition to the reason why we have mediation set up the way it is and the way that we go through such means in order to get people to arrive at their own decision.
Mm-hmm.
Because we think that the basic thing about the mediation that distinguishes it from other types of dispute resolution is that it's the party's own decision. And so what we're trying to do is help people cope with their problems in their own fashion so that they get not only a resolution of a conflict, but some feeling inside themselves that this is something that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can see that being dependent on the process or dependent on the mediators would cut against that.
Well, now, as an attorney, you made reference earlier to the counties who support this. I think maybe that's important to clarify. Is there public funds that help support what you're doing?
Right.
And they don't want to clog up the courts, so they say, you folks help us take care of these kinds of things that are more appropriately done outside of the litigation. But you don't get enough money from the county to do it, so you have to have people help pay for it? Is that why you charge?
The charge, the client fees, I'm not sure the percentage of our total budget that the client fees basically cover, but I think it's a very small percentage. And I think initially you had a problem out in the market anyway of getting people to be able to come and pay anything. And as it catches on, and another thing to think about here is a lot of our clients are people that are just basically not your middle class and rich type people that could afford to pay much more. And in fact, we will waive the fee. So what you're talking about here basically is the county has agreed that it will subsidize some level of dispute resolution. And from its point of view, if this stuff works, it means that we do not have to open an additional court, hire an additional judge. And that might be their bottom line thinking on it, but everyone knows that there's all kinds of conflict running around out there that will never get to a court. We get referrals from the police who are happy to send some stuff our way rather than sending it to some kind of court mechanism. While they're in the middle of that, they may decide, well, this needs to go over there. And we're starting to get stuff referred directly from the courts to the DRC. It's just
So is it mostly by referral, or is it sometimes by recruitment? Do you go out into the community and look for cases sometimes?
We go out and we have a speakers bureau, and so we do go out and speak to different institutions and some churches even. We've in the past some Stevens Ministries, different church organizations, different Rotary clubs, groups that we'll go speak to. And those generally will be either like a short 1-hour session about what the DRC has to offer them and what our services are. We have in the past also done some mini trainings and some techniques types of skills levels types of things for them to use in resolving their own disputes, or just to give them a sample of what we do. Our training that we provide for the mediators, volunteer mediators, is a 40-hour training, and it is a professional training. And they have agreed to volunteer for at least a year at the center, be available twice a month to volunteer as a mediator. And they also have some continuing education types of hours that they've agreed to do. So it is a commitment on their part.
If you're interested in either getting a speaker from the Dispute Resolution Center or in becoming a mediator, you could just contact the center?
That's right.
Let's find out how to contact the center, because I think we have a number to share with our viewers that people, after hearing this today, will very likely want to know more about it, and we'll show that on the monitor. And also, I'd like to pick up on this religious aspect, because you say you speak to churches. Stevens Ministries is a caring program to help people learn to help each other. One of the main resources of which I would think is to learn to be peacemakers in individual situations. And I'm intrigued by that, because in the Christian scriptures, Jesus talks about if you got a difference with your neighbor, just kind of lays out some steps about, you don't embarrass that person. You go to them individually. You don't try to keep it there. If you're not getting enough progress, you might bring 2 or 3 along with you, so that you have a third party present. And then it says, if you've done your best and there is no resolution of it, that you don't feel that you're compelled to spend the rest of your life trying to work out something that may be irreconcilable. And it seems to me there may be that part of your training that you would have to say is, look, you've done your best, you've given it your best shot, and yet if it's not going to happen, then you don't have to feel guilty about being a failure. Do you give absolution to your mediator?
To the disputants.
To the disputants.
Yeah.
Right. I think all of those principles apply in the mediation as well. The mere fact that it's a confidential meeting, and that's very clear from the very beginning. We tell them this is confidential, there's no tape recordings, nothing that's said in here can be used as evidence in court. This is a place to see if you can work out an agreement, or if you can come to some kinds of an agreements, and if you can't, then you still have all the other options available to you, through the courts or through your church or whatever you want to pursue. Saving face. You're alluded to that a little bit. The people are treated with the utmost respect. Their problems are their problems, and we respect them, and we're there to help them come to a solution to it. And there's no problem that's too small for mediation. And I think people are very much taken aback by that when they come in, because they don't expect that their problem will be treated with so much respect.
And after they're in the mediation process, you mentioned earlier that they get a good sense of themselves and maybe a better sense of communication. But I wonder, what else do they get? Do they take something with them from the process? They take the agreement with them? How does that work?
If they come to an agreement, the mediators can write up an agreement form, and it's a simple agreement, like Richard agrees to do this, Ruth agrees to do that. They all sign the agreement, and then they get a copy of it, and they take it out with them.
Is something like that legally binding, or?
No, it's not. It's binding. It would depend on the judge who were to see it.
Well, if the parties want to have something that's legally binding, what they can do is go to an attorney. We're getting more and more situations where it's actually an attorney who has referred his client to the DRC. And what the attorneys will tell you is that it may not be an agreement, but it might be some evidence of what you've agreed to and what the parties intended. But we like to stay away from the legalistic aspects, and we do in fact have attorneys that participate in the actual mediations. But we let them know that we're not here to render any kind of legal,
It's not a legal institution. Right. It's maybe something to keep from filling up the legal institutions.
Right.
And what happens if the mediation just isn't successful, but it's still not a legal issue? It's just unresolved. Say there's a parent and a child, or a business conflict that's just unresolved. What's their next step, or how can you assist them?
If they need assistance, we can refer them to other places. We can refer them to a lawyer referral service if they need to pursue the legal route. We can pursue them to different agencies if they want to pursue psychological help. We can do that. But again, you have to think, what is successful? I mean, although you don't come to an agreement maybe, but what is it successful if a child and a parent starts to communicate with each other on a different level, where they're actually hearing one another, where they're showing each other respect? What is success? they're so...
It's hard to measure.
Yeah. 98% of the people who come to mediation, so we do a survey at the end of the mediation and then a 2-month follow-up survey, 98% say they're glad they came. And many of them, I don't know exactly the number, but many of them say maybe the agreement fell through, but it didn't matter because they were communicating better. And so they were glad to have had the experience.
So the write-up that you do is to summarize what's happened. It's to say, here are points of your agreement, continued points of disagreement. This is what we can do to work on our areas of disagreement. And they're willing, in some cases, maybe you suggest that they come back to see how they're progressing. You said there was a 2-month...
A 2-month follow-up survey. Right. We send the survey out to them for them to complete and send back to us. It's a follow-up to see how the agreement's going, how they felt about the mediators, were they well served, those kinds of questions.
One thing that's real important about the agreement, though, is that absolutely every word in it is the parties' words. We don't listen to them and then transcribe.
You don't give them the words to say. It comes from them.
Their own words.
Okay. Well, you know, one of the things that I've felt as I knew that you were going to be with us today is just how tough dispute resolution is. I mean, you look at the Middle East, for example. I mean, there's dispute and conflict writ large, and attempts to make peace there just seems to be impossible, to the point that people get, they may generalize and they say, you know, there's just, that peacemaking is an illusion, that the conflict is inevitable. Do you ever run into that attitude that, you know, is just hopeless? Hopeless.
I'd love to address that, because that's a real important thing. And it's true, people come into mediations and they come in from anywhere with their positions. This is what I'm going to have happen. What we do in the mediations is focus on not their positions, but what are their interests. And I have an example, a story for that. There are 2 sisters that have an orange, and they decide, well, the best thing to do would be, each of them wants the orange, and they only have 1 orange, so they divide it in half, and each sister has a half. Well, if they talked about it and decided and found out what the interests were, they would have realized that the one sister wanted to make orange juice and the other wanted to peel to do some cooking. And so, but they didn't go through the process of identifying what their interests were. So in mediation, that's what we're doing. We're identifying the interests and then start to come up, well, what are some options of ways that we can address those interests so that everybody comes out win-win.
So you really, you have to take a step back almost when people come in. They come in with some sort of preconceptions about what they want. Maybe they don't understand the process. And so you really need to lay out some ground rules and discuss that. Are there some specific things that happen when they first walk in?
Well, when they first walk in, they sit down and say, this is how I see the situation, this is what I want to happen, after the ground rules are laid out. And you have to allow for some time of ventilation, is what we call it. And that's where they're getting out frustrations, emotions. You have to allow that, because if you don't, it's going to come out at the time when you start your agreement writing. And so...
Just all listening at that point, pretty much.
But the mediators are listening and identifying what their interests are, what the issues are, and then they take the process from there with clarifying what they are and generating options for each of the issues. So it is a process, and in the process of this process, and they are identifying what the interests are. And it works.
So what would be one of the first steps of progress is to get them to agree on what the problem is.
Right.
If they can get agreement that this is the issue, and that's an important step forward. And if you begin to convey to them that there are ways of responding to it that they haven't thought about before, you say showing them their options, that creates hope in itself, it would seem to me, and break this mindset that there's just no way out.
That's right.
Is that the way it works?
Yes, I want to point out, though, that the mediators don't ever give them options, but they ask questions in a way where the people come up with their own. So, again, it lends power back to the people, where they come up with their own, they determine what their problem are, they determine what their interests are, they determine what the solutions are. And then if they have an agreement, it's in their words. The mediators are just there to help with the process.
The reason it works a lot, though, is because for the first time, in a lot of instances, this is the first time that the parties have actually heard one another. Because you can understand how conflict is resolved outside of that process. Maybe a lot of shouting and yelling and
not a lot of
name-calling.
listening.
And there's no name. there's no list, we don't hear. And this provides them with an opportunity, maybe for the first time, to actually hear, why Dad wants curfew at 10:30 on the weeknights and things like that.
Do you see any sort of long-term goals now for the center? Is it growing? Is it sort of operating and you're just trying to manage your cases? Where does it look like it's going to be?
Well, I always tell people when they ask me, what is your goal for the Dispute Resolution Center? And I always tell them, well, I want it to be the Dispute Resolution Center of the universe. Okay?
We could use one.
And we are well on our way. And it's because we're getting into a phenomenon here that's just catching on not only in Texas but statewide. I kind of compare legal costs with health care costs. And you, I think, have a society which is becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the cost of health care and also the cost of legal services. And I think what we'll be seeing is that the community will be looking for less expensive ways to resolve conflict. They'll think they're on to something new. Actually, the ADR's been around for centuries.
Well, and isn't it the case that you've got mediation services of this kind nationally? I mean,
Yes.
It's not just Texas. Isn't there a national mediation program that you're related to?
Well, we're a private nonprofit and run within ourselves, but there are several national organizations and dispute resolution centers all over the nation.
And there are other centers in Texas?
There's at least 12 other in Texas.
Are they somewhat similar across the state and across the nation, or do you see that they have a different focus in different parts of the nation? Or
Yeah, they do. There's different focuses and even different techniques in mediation. So it's
They're kind of getting back to the idea of where we want to go. This whole concept started with the idea of the community neighborhood justice center, and it was like a place that you would go when you had a conflict, and you'd walk through a door, and there would be all these different alternatives. One of which might well be the court system. They might have arbitration, they would have mediation, and you would go in and you would talk to someone and say, well, where should we go? And they say, well, we think you should try this type of
Okay,
dispute
and so
resolution.
out of that origin has come what you've been describing to us today, and there's no dispute that the Dispute Resolution Center has been a blessing to this community, and I'm sure to our viewers who've looked in. The conflict and agreement, dispute and reconciliation, all of these are the elements of any relationship, and the DRC offers an important alternative to help each other make peace. On behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, this is Richard Thompson.
And I'm Ruth Landsberg, and I thank you for joining us, and we invite you to be with us again next week.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.